let me ask you something before we start recording, or you may record this if you wish. There's a question about whether they should take notes on the presentation or whether it will be available for downloading. Can you answer that?
Well, if you send me the presentation, I'll be happy to share it with them.
Okay, that will be good. Then yes, the presentation will be available for downloading. So you don't need to take notes, although there probably won't be, well, the whole thing will be available to you. Okay, let me tell you just a little bit about me. I hope that you can understand English, and I hope that you can understand Southern English, because I'm from Alabama, which is in the South. I'll try to talk very distinctly, but we have a little different accent. I live in Warrior, Alabama, which is a small town, and I write STEM curriculum for middle schools. So I've had a lot of practice with that. I've been doing it for about 10 years. And I have a blog called STEM by Design, where you can get more information about STEM if you like. I have a link to that at the end of the webinar. Now, would you tell me just a little bit about you? Can you type into the chat box whether you are a teacher, whether you teach middle school or high school, or what your position is? Would you take a minute to do that, please? Okay, I see 2 people.
We have elementary science lab teachers, principal elementary.
Okay, good. We have teachers and we have administrators. Hi. Okay, I'm going to assume that we have middle school, high school teachers and administrators, and that's great. I'm going to be asking you to type into the chat box from time to time as we go along, so sort of find that chat box and get used to it if you would, please. In this session, I'm going to give you some information about STEM, especially middle and high school STEM, and some reasons that STEM is important to your students. And I'm going to try to remember to move the slides along. I want you to think about these questions as we go through this presentation. What is STEM? What does a STEM classroom look like? And why is this important to your students? Why should you do this, or what is the value? And then at the end of the session, I'm going to give you a link to some web documents that you can use to get more information about STEM. And if you have some documents that you think are good and you want me to add them, please send them to me and I'll set up a site where we can share those. Now, let's begin by taking a look at a STEM lesson. Okay. This is a STEM classroom. And I want you to notice what's going on. Now, if I were to ask you, what can you tell about STEM by just looking at these pictures? I wonder what you could tell me. Look at them and think, what are the students doing? What kinds of things are they learning? And so would you type into the chat window, just a minute, what you think, what you see happening in these pictures? What are the students doing, and what kind of things might they be learning, and that sort of thing? Very good.
Somebody said discovering concepts, experiments, learning by doing.
Mm-hmm. You have a lot of good ideas. Cooperative way is very good. Learning to infer, to experiment, investigating. Hands-on activities and formal calculations. Yes, indeed. That must be a math teacher. That's correct.
Working in groups or in teams?
Working in groups and teams, analyzing data. And yes, good, Ricardo. It's related to real-life situations. So you can see some things right here that are happening. Let me tell you just a little bit about this classroom. In Mobile, Alabama, there's a problem with the water. I don't know if you have problems with fresh water in Guatemala or not, but we do in the United States. And in Mobile, there's a lot of construction going on. They're building many things. And as you know, that means a lot of the soil, suelo, is loose. And there's a lot of erosion that's going on. So following a heavy rain, the streams around the construction site look like this. And some of these streams actually run into the lake that holds the drinking water for Mobile. So this is a real problem for the people in the area. And the schools and the students in the school I worked with were really interested in this problem. Now, in science, let me go back to the students. In science, these schools had studied water and watersheds, cuencas, I think. In mathematics, they had studied the flow rate. And I'm not sure I can say flow rate in Spanish. Would somebody like to say that for me? Velocidad de flujo or something of that nature. But at any rate, that's what they were studying in mathematics, how to measure the rate at which something flows. So they used what they were learning in mathematics and in science to work on solving this problem. In fact, they worked on this for 5 days. Now, they got into teams, as you notice, and we called them student engineering teams. And they came up with several ideas for how the problem might be solved because there was more than one possible right answer. And they decided to, what they would do would be to try to slow down the rate at which the soil was being washed from the smaller streams into the larger streams that led to the watershed. So each team designed a series of barriers that they thought would work. They were going to try to block the sediment so that it wouldn't flow into the bigger streams, but they wanted the water to keep flowing. So in this photo, what they're doing is testing their barrier systems. Each team is sending water down that model stream bed, and they're measuring the amount of sediment that goes by the barriers and goes into the larger stream. Now, the larger stream, in this case, is just a bucket at the end of the table. They calculated the amount of time in which a certain amount of sediment was flowing into the larger stream, and they used a lot of the math that they had studied in math class to do this. And after they did this, they saw, whoops, our barrier systems aren't working well. So some of them had to change their barrier systems. Each team came up with their own design. And they would test them, they would change things. And what they learned was that it's okay to fail, too. It's okay if their barrier system doesn't work. That's just a way of learning. So they used what they learned to redesign a better system. Also, during this lesson was taking place in the science lab, as you can probably tell. But the math teacher, Mr. Curtis, came in to help. And one of the students I overheard remark, Mr. Curtis, now I know why we need to learn how to calculate flow rates. So there was a reason for them to use that math. They understood why, and then they were excited about using it. So science and math were working together in this project. Now, a few of the students, I will mention this, they had a great time with this, and they designed some prototypes that were pretty good. But a few of the students started to realize that, hey, we are slowing down the amount of sediment that's getting into the larger stream, but guess what? We're creating a new problem. The sediment is building up in the stream bed. Now what are we going to do? So it calls for more research and development. But now then, knowing that about this picture, if I were to ask you to tell some things about STEM, I wonder what you could tell. I haven't told you anything about STEM. All I've done is just show you an example of a STEM lesson in action. So from that, if you had to describe a STEM lesson right now to a colleague, what would you tell them about STEM? Would you answer that by putting some answers in the chat window?
Les quería pedir a todos los que participen si pueden verificar que en el chat diga enviar a todos los participantes para que todos podamos ver sus respuestas.
You're coming up with all the right answers, looking good. Right. Anybody else got some ideas? You have some really good ideas. You've got some of the big ideas here now with the collaboration, problem solving, data collecting, real world problems, cross-discipline, integrated. STEM is useful to solve problems. Yes, Dale. Evaluating, re-evaluating, integrating several subjects. Oh dear. And it's a method for solving problems at the same time, and so forth. So we actually, you've come up with a lot of wonderful thoughts and wonderful ideas here. And the thing is, you're right. I didn't have to tell you what STEM was. You just had to see it in action. Now, let's talk about STEM directly now. Let's take a look at the word and sort of dissect it. All right, what do the letters in STEM represent? Let's take them one at a time and talk about them just a little bit. All right, what about the S? Can you type into the chat window, what does the S represent? What word does it stand for? Although it doesn't start with an S in Spanish, does it? What does the S stand for?
Can you hear me? Great. And can you please test your audio again?
hear me up until now or not? Okay, I hope you can hear me. Angelica, can you tell me or not? Am I coming through?
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, have you been able to hear me the whole time?
No, unfortunately not. Just until now.
Okay. Well, backing it up just a little bit, I'm not going to go through the whole thing again, but let me back up to right here and ask you what the S stands for in STEM.
Most of us answered science.
Oh, okay. So you heard that part then, right?
Yes, I think you can start with the T.
All right, let's start with the T. All right. What does the T stand for? Just type it into the chat window. Okay, the T stands for technology. Now, most of the time, what do you think of when you think of technology? Feel free to use the chat window back and forth. I'm used to people chatting in the chat window all the time, so it doesn't bother me at all. Normally, people think of computers and digital media. Let me tell you how we define technology in STEM. Technology is any product created by people to meet a need or a want. For example, if you're writing something right now, the pencil you're holding or the paper is technology because it was created by humans to meet a need. So when students are working on projects, they are actually creating technologies as they create products and prototypes to solve problems. So all technology doesn't have to refer to electronic equipment. However, in today's world, it's important that we have, that kids have a great understanding of the digital age and computers and digital products. In the particular lesson I was showing you, this young man has collected data on his barrier system, or the team's barrier system, and he is about to enter that into a computer, into a spreadsheet that's going to combine all of the data from all of the teams and help them analyze that data. So they're using technology in that particular setting. All right, let's take a look at the E in STEM. What does the E stand for? Except I think in Spanish it would be an I.
That's right. The acronym would be very different.
Yes. You would have a CTIM.
Right.
All right. It stands for engineering. Now, this is probably the biggest thing to note about STEM. It uses engineering. It uses a systematic approach to design and create products that solve problems. So whether, you think about technologies, it includes everything from space satellites to the common pen. All of these are the result of engineering. So engineering is not only problem solving, it is a process for solving problems. And this is one of the things that the students all do when they go into a STEM class. They use an engineering design process. It's not exactly the same as a traditional design process because it always leads to the creation of some sort of product or solution for a solution. The words are a little blurry, but they'll be familiar to you. You can see that one of the things the kids have to be able to do is do background research. And one of the things I wanted to point out there is that it doesn't have to be reading and writing kind of research. It can be hands-on research, like they did in finding out what kind of barriers work best before they did their project. Also notice that there's always more than one right answer. And in math, for example, if you're doing traditional math, you want the kids to find the right answer, one right answer. But in STEM, there are multiple right solutions for coming up with an answer for a problem. They learn to choose the best solution, and then they create prototypes of their solution. Obviously, they can't build a real dam, but they can create a prototype. And then, of course, the testing and evaluation and communication is a tremendously important part of STEM. How do we get this information across to other team members or to other people? Can we write an article and send it to the newspaper? Do we act like newscasters and report our findings? How do we communicate in a variety of ways? So there's a certain process that the kids follow. Now, this process is not actually linear. You don't have to follow it in this order. You might actually develop multiple right solutions and then go back and do some background research to see which is better, that sort of thing. So you just want to be able to understand that while it looks very linear, it's not really. This is just a way of helping students learn to think like an engineer.
And we have a question here.
Yes.
How does that compare with the scientific method? Or do we use it? Or is it just like the engineering design process?
No, the scientific method is something that's different. As I said before, it's hard on the surface to see the difference, but I was a science teacher. And so in science, you are looking generally to, you can either prove something that's already been proved, or you can just simply have it something to get information, you know, about something. Suppose we're talking about acid rain. I might do a science experiment to see which plants are affected the most by acid rain. That would be a good science experiment. But in a STEM project, what I would do is take that knowledge that I gained and I would use it to design perhaps a farm that had the right kind of plants in it or something of that nature. Do you see the difference? In science, you get the information. In STEM, you apply the information to solve a real problem. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, glad to. The last letter in STEM stands for what? I know we have one math teacher here at least, so I'm sure he knows what it stands for. It stands for mathematics. Now, in the class that we were looking at, the kids were doing a lot of math. And here's the important thing. Both the science and the math were grade level. They weren't using simple math or simple science. They were using grade level stuff. They were trying to go deeper, understand it better. So this young man is coming to a real understanding of flow rate and how that actually works and what benefit that is. I think when they get through doing a STEM project, you'll never hear a student ask again, why do I need to learn this? Because they've taken what they've learned and they have applied it. But, you know, you might say, wait a minute, our school already offers mathematics. Because your school offers mathematics, does that mean you're teaching STEM? Just put yes or no or C or no or whatever in the chat box. What do you think? You're correct. It does not mean that you're teaching STEM. We've always offered these courses, haven't we? We've always had science and math and more recently technology. And and we weren't teaching STEM then. STEM, then exactly what is STEM? Let's take a look. STEM is, I want you to think of middle and high school education here now, okay? In elementary, it looks a little different. But in elementary and high school, STEM is an integrated approach to learning, and it focuses on combining knowledge from 4 areas: science, technology, engineering, and math to solve real-world problems. So that probably is the best definition of STEM. And the key word is integrated. These subjects are deliberately put together so that students realize, hey, we're using math and science together. They're not in separate classrooms all the time. They're not 2 entirely separate things. No. We work together with those to solve problems. Now, let me take just a minute here and ask you so far, okay, do you have any questions so far? If so, type them in. Type them in Spanish, and Angelica will translate for me. Did you see Jose's question?
I don't see any questions right now. No questions, I think.
Okay.
Oh, okay, here's one. It says that to make STEM, does it have to be a multidisciplinary team?
If you're talking about, are you talking about teachers or students?
I think it's more teachers.
Okay.
It's the planning. Like a STEM project, you need like a multidisciplinary team.
The planning should be, the best case scenario, I'm going to give you that, is yes. Now, you and I both know that sometimes the best case scenario just doesn't work for one reason or another. But in the best case scenario, of course, because as a science teacher, I might not know how to use the grade level mathematics in this science project. And so the math teacher and I would need to get together and figure that out. And that would be the best look of all. We're using the math that she's teaching and the science that I'm teaching in a real world scenario. Brett was asking, does STEM have to have all categories? Very good question, Brett. STEM needs to have all 4, but one can be a little more dominant than the other. In other words, you could focus mostly on science, but bring in some math. Remember, the whole purpose of this is to help kids learn to integrate these. It could be mostly math, and you could bring in some science. It could actually be mostly technology, especially with the new focus on coding. But you still need the math and the science and the real world problem that's being addressed. So it doesn't have to contain all categories equally.
Another question here is, what are the limitations for students to resolve STEM problems or real-world STEM problems? And the other one is, how can you maintain like the scope and sequence of the curriculum of all the subjects with STEM projects? Like, is it difficult to not get lost like in the project and lose like the scope and sequence of the curriculum?
Oh, that's a really good question too. Both of those are good. I'm not sure if are there limitations of STEM that the students must use to resolve real world problems. Is that what you're saying? The first question that you read?
Yeah, what would be like the limitations for young students?
They will always have a set of constraints and criteria. If you're talking about any problem that they address, like the problem that we were talking about with creating the barrier systems, they had to use only a certain amount of clay because in real life you can only afford a certain amount of your material in engineering. You know, you try to be efficient with your money. And I'm not sure if I'm answering the kind of question that Jose is asking or not. Jose, if you want to reword that so I'll understand it just a little better, I'll go ahead to the second question, which was what? And then we'll come back to Jose.
It's about the scope and sequence of the curriculum.
Right. On the scope and sequence, honestly, what I do is sit down with math teachers. They have the math scope and sequence. I have the science scope and sequence, and we look at the quarter that we're working in. Our year is divided into 4 quarters. And maybe during the first quarter, we notice that they're teaching something to do with the flow rate in math, and that's how we came up with this project. And I'm teaching something to do with water and watersheds and science, and so we put those together and we think, okay, what kind of project would kids be using both of those in? And we do tie it to the scope and sequence because I'm sure you're like we are, we don't have time to just go off and do something else that has nothing to do with our scope and sequence. But the only 2 things that we actually consider are the math and science at this point, because our technology scope and sequence is not very firm at this point. Did that help? Okay. I'm concerned that I didn't answer Jose's problem. So Jose, if you want to reword that.
He said that he solved the question. He just answered back that yes, my question was answered.
All right. We have to set criteria and limits on mainly because of materials and the availability and the lack of availability. All right. Are there any other questions so far? And just to clarify, Angelica, we are going until 5:30. Is that correct?
4:30 our time. Yes.
I mean 4:30. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're an hour ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's take a look at why STEM. Now, you might think to yourself, okay, you know, why are we putting all this intensive focus right now on math and science, and we're trying to get the kids into engineering mindsets? Why is that? Well, industry is actually the driving force behind most of this. This is a response to what the 21st century workforce tells us is a critical need, that the world needs a workforce with skilled science and technology innovators to address these challenges that you're looking at. These are just a few of the challenges that are coming up in this century that we must address. Climate change, clean water is a big one for many people. Food shortages, increase in diseases, energy shortages, and many other things that you can probably name that are critical, and we need to be able to address those. But right now, there's a mismatch between how we're educating our children and how business and industry need them to be educated, what they need from them when they come there. We tend to, I'm speaking in America, in the United States now, because I don't know, your education system may be meeting these challenges much better than we are. But right now, we seem to be stuck in an old way of teaching and trying to prepare students for the 21st century for jobs, and we don't even know what those jobs are going to be yet. So how are we going to educate them to do that? And what they are asking for is jobs that will create highly skilled technology and science innovators because of the kind of needs that they're facing. Now, let me say this. Is there anybody there who is not a science or technology person or a math person? Would you just put in not or something so I'll know how many people are not connected to science or technology or math here? Okay. Russell, I'm going to pick on you just a minute, but I'm glad that you're not, because what I want to know is a lot of people then say, look, wait a minute, what about language arts? What about art? What about social studies? Why are we just focusing on math and science? And the answer is simply, we're not just focusing on math and science. We're focusing on math and science in STEM. But the school itself goes right on putting a heavy emphasis on the language arts, on social studies and history, on art, and on other subjects. So you keep right on teaching those. What we're doing is teaching math and science and differently. And technology comes into that too. We're just teaching them differently. We're not teaching them in exclusion of the other subjects. So let's be very, very clear on that. We aren't always teaching them differently either, because when I'm teaching about water or watersheds, I may be doing that in a rather traditional way. But when we get into the STEM class, then it's when we take it and apply it and really use it to develop those skills that business and industry are telling us they want us to work with. Any questions? Just type questions. If you have questions about anything I say, type it as we go along. All right, now then, along with the skills, they want kids to understand and be able to apply mathematics and science and technology. They want business and industry want deep understandings of those. But let's take a look at some other skills that they want us to develop. And STEM can develop all of these, and so can some other subjects. But STEM hits each of these as we do these lessons. Now, let me say this. They don't hit each of these every STEM lesson, doesn't hit everything. But you can, as you go back and teach again, you might focus on a different one. For example, effective communication might be one that you don't focus on in one lesson as much as you do another. You've already told me that collaboration and teamwork are important. Critical thinking and problem solving. Oh, that's really important. One time I had a man from business tell me, hey, I just wish these kids could recognize a problem, much less solve it. So critical thinking and problem solving, we have to train them to do that. That doesn't come naturally and can't wait until they're 18 years old and get a job for them to learn that. Creativity and innovation. There's a lot of opportunity in STEM because they're not given any right answers. They're put out there and they're said, come up with some solutions. And just know that there is more than one solution. Be as creative as you like. It's got to be reasonable, and it has to be based somehow on research. You can't just make up something out of the air. It has to be logical. All right. Effective communication we've mentioned. Managing information. This is where our computers are so vital. It gives kids a way to manage vast amounts of information and make decisions. And today they're even learning to input that information to code programs themselves and design their own ways of getting that information. Entrepreneurship, that's just being able, what is the word for entrepreneurship? I didn't think to look that one up, Angelica.
Emprendimiento.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And one of the things we don't often think about, civic responsibility. If you will look back at these problems that the kids are going to solve, they need to care about these problems. Do they care whether other people have clean water? Do they care whether other people have food? Do they care about solving disease problems and energy shortages? It teaches a kind of a civic responsibility because of the nature of the problems that they can address. Now, there are a lot of ways to address environmental problems and so forth, and it can be a small problem that they address sometimes, like just something that affects their school or something of that nature. But it does tend to develop civic responsibility. Now, if we're going to teach kids these skills, then what are the implications for teachers? Think about that. The picture, which looks like a picture in which kids would learn more? The picture on the left or the picture on the right? Any thoughts on that? Yep, you're right. It's the one on the right where the kids are engaged in learning. Now, the one on the left is how I learned. The only thing I saw around me was the back of the kid's head in the seat in front of me normally in my classroom when I was growing up. That was just the way we all learned then in the United States. Now, you see a lot more pictures like the one on the right because we realize how much kids can learn from each other. We realize how much they learn by working together. And we realize that when they get out of school, they have to be able to work productively with other people in order to produce the solutions that we need. And so one of the things that we can do in all classes, but we must do in STEM, is to put kids in teams and have them look for answers together. There are a couple of questions I missed. It says, why is step 2 always the most difficult part? Step 2. I'm trying to look at step 2. I don't remember what step 2 is. Let me think. I'm sorry, I passed that one by. If you want to explain that to me again, I will get right back to it. And the second one was, does civic responsibility, is that about values? And yes, it is. It helps kids to develop values. It helps them value not only our environment and our planet, but the people who live there. And that's what we really need to happen today. So this is one way of addressing, when people can address needs productively, if people are hungry, if we can address that productively and do something about it, then there's less likelihood that people will become violent because they're hungry. So let's, just think about all of the possibilities here.
There's also a question here that says, how long does a STEM lesson usually take?
The STEM lessons usually take anywhere from 2 to 5 days. Now, when I say days, I mean periods. Remember, we're talking middle or high school. So say it's a 60-minute period or a 45-minute period or something. It usually takes 2 to 5 days of those, depending on how deep the kids go into that. The one that I showed you about the watershed and the barrier system took 5 days. It took 45 minutes in math and 45 minutes in science every day for 5 days. There are other ones that take less than that. And one of the things that we can do, and at our next meeting, if you like, is talk about what those lessons look like. Where can you find them, or how do you develop them yourselves? Don't have time to go into that today, but think about it, and if that's something you would like to do next time, then we'll do that. All right, someone has already asked me this question, so I don't need to go into it too much, but what are these teachers doing, do you think? If we have to teach differently, what does that mean? So what does it look like they're doing to you? These are, by the way, this is a math teacher, science teacher, math teacher, science teacher, math teacher, and an elementary teacher who teaches both science and math. She's a 5th grade teacher. So what do you think they're doing? Yep, they're collaborating. They're trying to work together to figure out a STEM project. They've got a battery there on the table, right here, and they're trying their best to figure out how to make that battery turn a wheel at a certain speed, not just as fast as it will, but how to control the speed so that they can help the kids, so that this will become part of a project that the kids were doing in STEM. So they're working together and they're sharing their knowledge and they're trying to learn what they can about the STEM project. Actually, David, your question is a very good question. Do we have a special STEM class schedule, or do we use existing math and science classes? Again, now that is different in different schools. The best possible scenario is to do that in existing math and science classes. And why do you think that would be? It would be because that way all children, all kids, all students are exposed to STEM. If you set just a one class aside and say, well, we have a STEM class over here, often it's made up of electives. The kids can choose to go there or not, or maybe there's not time for all kids to go there. And what we want to do is expose all kids to STEM. Not all of them are going into STEM, but it'll give them all some lifelong skills that they need. And then they'll be ready to choose more advanced math and science courses and that kind of thing. So the best possible look is to do it in the math and science classes. If you cannot work that out, then do it. Some schools do it in a separate pull-out class. Some schools do it after school. And of course, it doesn't reach all students there either. But it's better to do it in a less than ideal way than not to do it at all. All right. Now, how do we educate students in a way that prepares them to meet 21st century challenges is a question that we are all going to face as educators, especially math and science educators. And that's a tough question. Do you have any thoughts on that? Let me ask you this. Are there teachers in your schools, or perhaps you or someone that does not put kids in teams? Do you have teachers in your school who do not put kids in teams for any reason? You've never seen kids in teams in their room. That might be one thing. I'm afraid so. I think most schools do. Teachers need special training and development in order to teach in a brand new way. We have a saying here in the South that you can't build an airplane while you're flying it. And that's kind of what we try to do as teachers sometimes. We're trying to change the way we teach while we're teaching. That's why we need to help from our colleagues. We need to meet during the day to plan for the next day sometimes. We need to really prepare. Now, I notice we have some administrators here. And it's very important to understand that you can't say to a teacher a week ahead of time, oh, next week I want you to start teaching STEM. There's got to be a little more preparation and planning time than that. David wants to know how we include English. Project plans, other documentations, yes. English is included just automatically. We speak English, of course, so that's the way they communicate. Because we have a new curriculum now, which has gained so much notoriety that you've probably heard of it. It's called the Common Core curriculum, and it has the language arts teachers are teaching technical material as well as literature, teaching kids how to read and understand technical material, which actually would help in STEM. Now, let me make it clear that the STEM teachers don't teach English. We leave it to the English teachers to do that. But sometimes they will coordinate with the STEM teachers, and that really works well. Okay, let's get back to our question here. We're going to have, if we're going to teach teachers to teach differently, we're going to have to really plan how to do this. And that's the topic for another type webinar. That's not for this, but there are some definite program planning steps that you need to go through. In the meantime, if you're a teacher and you just want to start teaching STEM, there's help for you there. I can help you with that, and we can work on that again maybe the next time we have a webinar. One of the things I wanted to mention to you was that Angelica has a list of characteristics of STEM classrooms. I sent it to her earlier, and you could email her at this email, or Angelica, I think you said that you would actually just go ahead and send that to everyone on the list. Is that right?
Yes, to everyone that registered to the webinar, I have their email, so I'll send the document that you sent me this morning to all of them.
All right, that would be great. And that document will contain some information that will, it's sort of like a checklist, and you can say, okay, maybe, you know, I'm not doing this now, and I need to, and this needs to be something that I'm doing in my classroom. We can also talk about that document at the next webinar and talk about how to make those things happen in your classroom, if that's something you would like. Now, just to get some more information about STEM itself, I've been blogging about it for about a little over 2 years now. And so I've put the address there for my blog, and you can go there and flip through the blog and find, you know, a topic on writing lessons, or a topic on setting up a STEM program, or a topic on how to choose a real problem, or, you know, different things like that. You can email me directly if you like at ajolly@bellsouth.net. And now I'd like to take some, but before we go on and talk about our next webinar, I want to see what questions you have about this webinar. Thinking in this terms, we've seen an example of a STEM classroom, and you've identified some characteristics. Then we looked at each letter in the acronym STEM, and even though it would be a different acronym for you, and we see, you know, what 4 subjects we're including in this. And I hope you understand that these subjects, this program is not meant to exclude any subject from being taught really well and from having a focus. It just means that to get kids where they need to be for the workforce, for certain businesses and industries, we need to teach math and science differently. That's why we're doing this. And we need to bring in technology in a more real way. Now, knowing that, what are your thoughts about what you've heard so far, or what are your questions? David, what did you mean electroshock therapy? There you go.
There are lots of questions. One is, how do you assess the final product, or how does evaluation change? Actually,
you can use the checklist I sent to check whether your class and everything has the characteristics of a STEM class. But if you're checking the final product, it has to be a formative type evaluation. In other words, you look at it, does it meet criteria? You have a certain set of criteria. For example, you have to use only a certain amount of clay to build your structures. They can only be in, you know, these particular shapes. They must not block the water from flowing. So you see, does your product meet the criteria? And if it does, then you grade it accordingly. If it does not, then it may be that it's just difficult to meet it. So you can go with, okay, what kind of efforts has the team made then to go back and make adjustments based on data that they've gotten from their feedback. We had one group of students who were actually developing airbags to catch people who were falling off of buildings. That sounds strange, but one of them had someone who was killed, a friend who was killed falling off of a building that was on fire. And therefore, the class became interested, how could we prevent that? So they were working on airbags. Well, none of them ever quite got the airbag just right, but they got pretty close, the little airbag prototypes they were using. And so they, you know, it goes a lot by, did they meet the criteria? Did they observe the constraints? And did they make the effort to adjust? How long did it take to plan my first STEM project? That was a while. The first one I ever did, it really wasn't a good STEM project. And so I had to go back and look at the whole thing and say, no, this is really not STEM. This is just a science experiment. And so I would say it probably took me a couple of weeks to do the first one. And after that, you know, things got easier. The nice thing is, after you get some of these projects done, then you've gotten them. You can adjust them, but you don't ever have to rewrite them or do them again or find them again. David, when you say teacher motivation, I assume that you're meaning that not all teachers are motivated to be STEM teachers or to teach in this manner. And that's correct. It's hard to change the way you're teaching, especially if you feel some success in the way you're teaching. And you think, well, hey, my kids are learning the math and they're learning the science and they like me and I'm a really good teacher. So what you really have to do there is start with, why are we doing this? What is the value to the kids? And how are the kids going to learn those concepts you're teaching them to be successful in the 21st century workforce? And do you even know what the 21st century workforce is going to need them to be able to do? They have to be able to be very flexible. So that's why it's important to teach them in a way where the students are more or less making their decisions, trying out solutions, failing, and learning to stick with it until they come up with the right answer. So sometimes you have to start with the why, and that may help. And sometimes you just start by saying, we're going to do this, and then other teachers can help teachers be successful. That's why we need to work together. And what else did you want to know?
There's a question here that says, how do you start a project? Is something based on a problem that students are curious about, or do you propose the problem based on the standards you need to address?
Oh, the answer is yes to both. Sometimes, like the problem of falling airbag, you know, the airbag problem where the young man had fallen off of a burning building, or had jumped, I guess, and you know, he jumped to his death naturally because there was nothing there to catch him. That was an immediate problem that the kids were interested in. So we just grabbed the standards that we had and looked at them and said, okay, actually, I was teaching chemistry at that time. So how are we going to do that? Well, it wasn't too hard to figure out that, you know, you have to form a gas to fill up that airbag. So we used acetic acid, which is vinegar, and sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda, two harmless things, but they had to figure out how to mix those in proportions to get enough gas to fill the airbag to reach the point where it was not too tight so the person wouldn't bounce off, but it wasn't so loose that they would hit the floor, and that kind of thing. And then we used, of course, not real people. We used other objects to test it, or to ask the people. But at any rate, so in that case, a real problem drove it. And it was mostly science. We used math in the sense that we used charts and graphs and things of that, and scatter plots to show differences. Other times, the best possible way, of course, is to plan ahead of time, to look at your standards ahead of time and go ahead and find lessons and write lessons that meet those standards. And it takes a little longer sometimes to come up with a problem. But that's where you brainstorm, and you'd be surprised. If when you get 2 or 3 heads together, you can generally come up with some pretty good problems to solve. And the kids can really help you there. Oh, goodness, let them help you come up with some problems. Okay?
Well, it's almost time, but we still have some more questions. Just a quick one. Is STEM related to project-based learning?
It's very, actually, STEM is a I would say, a small version of project-based learning. It's very much related and fits very well within that. And if you have a project-based learning system going in your school, take a look at it and see if it includes a STEM component. How are the math and science being tied in? And they can suddenly become a STEM unit and still fit within that project-based system. It's very, very compatible with project-based learning.
There are several questions about evaluation, so maybe we can talk about that in the next webinar, because a lot of them are curious about how do you evaluate and assess STEM projects.
Right, and I presume you're talking about for a grade, right?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, well, let me touch on that in the next lesson that we have. That would be in July or something, which means right quickly, and I'm willing, of course, I've got all kinds of time. If you have to leave, you do that. But very quickly, if you would tell me what would you like our next session to cover? Do you want to go into lessons and evaluating lessons? And what topics do you want to know more about? And I'll try to include them.
Lesson plans, planning process, examples of STEM projects, evaluation.
All right.
Project design evaluation process.
Yeah, identifying real world problems. Yeah, I tell you what I'll do. I'll set up. Here's what I'm going to do before the next thing. I will set up a site that has a list of information, of articles on it that contain some of the information you're asking about, so that before we ever meet, you can read a little bit of, some of that information. Ricardo, you asked an excellent question. How do you train teachers to be able to create STEM projects? I had to do that with teachers in the Mobile County school system, and we trained enough teachers so that all math and science teachers in 11 middle schools could write lessons, sort of. And we did it wrong the first time, and then we did it right. So I can help with that question, I think, and I'll try to work that into this next one, because we'll talk some about how do you write STEM curriculum or to create STEM curriculum for your grade level and your subject. So we'll work on that some. And I will definitely look for some of those STEM-related resources. And like I said, I'll post those probably on the Scoop It site and just send the link to Angelica. And Angelica can forward that to you. Is that okay, Angelica?
Yeah, that's perfect.
All right. Well, I sincerely hope this has been understandable. I realize that there is some kind of there's a language barrier, basically my part, because I can't speak but one language. Most of you are better than that. You can speak two, and that's wonderful. So I hope that you've been able to understand this, especially Southern English. That's a real trick. And I look forward very much to meeting with you again in July.
Thank you so much, Anne. I think the webinar was very interesting. A lot of the participants are very interested in continuing learning about STEM and also how to start the STEM movement in their schools. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, you're quite welcome. Thank you so much for asking me. I've very much enjoyed meeting all of you.
Muchas gracias a todos los participantes. Les estaré enviando el documento de Anne mañana por la mañana. Y cualquier duda me pueden escribir a mí o le pueden escribir a Anne. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros.